morning, everyone, and welcome to Think Future. My name's Chris Kalaboukis, and once again, we're coming at you live from deep in the heart of Silicon Valley, California. We're talking innovation, startups, the future, not necessarily those, and not necessarily in that order. If you're watching on YouTube, smack that subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when a new show comes online. And when you're listening on your favorite podcast service, please subscribe and please drop a note on Apple Podcasts. I greatly appreciate it. So here we go again for another Startup Monday. And today I'm going to talk about a very simple app that I developed once. And I actually put it up online, and I got a little bit of a following for it, but I couldn't figure out how to monetize it, so I eventually took it down. But here's the idea. Basically, the idea is that whenever you're coming up with, when you want to make a decision on something, you eventually end up with two choices. So I came up with this idea that I called Fork, and it was like a hot or not for choices. And what would happen is that you could either go in and vote on things that were already there, or you could add your own choice. So what would happen is that you could go in and there would be a bunch of people already asking about the differences between two things. So you could go in there and you could pick what other thought was better. So for example, let's say I wanted to buy two different kinds of cars. Let's say I wanted to decide between a Mazda CX-5 and a CX-3 or a CX-30. So the difference between a CX-30 and a CX-50, right? So I would go in and I would put in CX-50, CX-30, because these are my two final decisions. And then I would put those into the tool, and people would come along and they would vote. People would come along and they would see these two choices, and you would pick between one of these two choices. And then as people picked, the numbers would change, right? So it was kind of like a hot or not for two choices. And what would happen is that over time, as more and more people would make these choices between these two choices, and eventually you could go back in and it would tell you, okay, out of the 1,000 people who participated in this hot or not style poll, 56% said choose the CX-50, and the rest said choose the CX-30. So it was very simple. It was called Fork with two Ks, F-O-R-K-K. And the idea was that in the end, you always have two choices. And if you ask me, the hot or not model, where you get two choices put in front of you, is really easy, right? It's really easy for someone to look at two things and decide which one they feel is better. Now, one of the problems with it was, of course, that you can't put too much information into it. And if you put too much information into it, then it's difficult to make that decision. But if you could just make a decision between two specific things, which, like I said, almost every decision comes down to two specific things. Because even if you have a decision among 100 different things, eventually most people narrow it down to two. And once you've narrowed it down to two, then you submit it into Fork, and you allow the crowd to decide which one of these two choices you should go with. Now, some of you might say, that's a terrible way of making a decision. And some of you may be right. But if you think about it, we are now entering an age, and I've said this before in many shows and on blog posts, where we've moved away from being Homo sapiens. If you ask me, I would almost call us Homo nexus, or the connected human. So instead of actually making decisions for ourselves, we put a lot of the onus for decision making on the crowd, on everybody else around us, on everyone else who knows us, on what's popular. What is this person like? What is that person like? This influencer I'm following, that's where we put our decision making in. We push things out to the crowd, and we expect the crowd to make the decision for us. Is that the kind of world that we're in now? I think a lot of people believe that they can't make a decision on their own, that the decision has to be a consensuous consensuous. Decision has to be a consensus among everybody a person knows. So if you think about it, that's actually a pretty good idea, because if you think about it, on the one hand, if you make a decision, if you take the decision of the crowd and it turns out to be bad, you could always blame the crowd. But if you take the decision and it's good, you could always say that the crowd made the decision and everybody in the crowd would be okay with it. So you see what I'm saying? So it talks about a broader question. The broader question is, do we still make decisions for ourselves, or do we allow our social networks and our social circles to make decisions for us? And if that's the case, then maybe a tool like Fork would work, because if people are leveraging their social networks to make decisions for them, then maybe something that allows their networks to make the decision on our behalf might be a good thing. So maybe now's the time for it. Maybe when I launched it, maybe 10 years ago, maybe that wasn't the time for it, but now, maybe now is the time for it. Maybe more people are so into allowing their social networks to make decisions for them that now might be a better time for something like Fork. That's it for me for today. See you next time, and until then, don't forget to think future.